From MTN News, this is Face the State.
Hello and welcome to Face the State. I'm Jay Kohn. I think you can guess what our topic is today in our morning program. Yes, we'll be discussing this transformational 2020 election with our two political consultants to drill down and see really what these results from Tuesday night mean for Montana in the long term. Had a big election this past week, and we're joined this morning by our two political analysts that helped us navigate the waters on election night and all the months leading up to it. Let's introduce you to first AshLee Strong, a Republican consultant, former advisor to Senator John Thune of South Dakota, and former communications director for former Speaker of the House Paul Ryan, both leadership positions. And AshLee, we're happy to have you back, and you look like you got way more sleep last night than I did. Good to have you here. You bet. Also, Eric Stern is with us. Eric is a senior counsel to both past Governor Brian Schweitzer and now soon to be past Governor Steve Bullock. He's also an author and attorney, and tells me he was the architect of the Democratic takeover in Montana in 2004. And he says what goes around comes around, I guess, after what we saw on Tuesday night. So both of you, thank you so much for joining us. Let's get your takeaway as we're recording this. We still don't know who won the presidency. So AshLee, as you look at those numbers, probably by the time this airs on Sunday, we're going to be able to maybe have a clue if it's Donald Trump reelected or if it's President-elect Joe Biden. But your takeaway from the national scene last night.
Sure. What I think we're seeing across the country is what we've seen even here in Montana, the polling significantly off. Public polls just seem to miss the mark yet again, similar to what how they missed in 2016. It's going to be a conversation we're going to have as a country, how we better analyze these races and how they're reported on, frankly. A lot of counties were off, a lot of states were off. And while we don't know the outcome as of right now, the day after the election, I'm sure we will by the time this airs, it's certainly not what was predicted. The overwhelming blue wave didn't come, and Donald Trump is putting up some pretty decent numbers. Whether or not he wins is yet to be seen, but certainly not what the polls predicted.
Eric, the Democrats, not just in Montana, but across the country, really licking their wounds this morning. They're, of course, hoping that Joe Biden can get those swing states that he needs, and we'll see if that happens. But really, it had to be just disappointment all across the board for the Democratic Party last night.
Well, not across. I mean, obviously, I think that Biden is looking pretty good to take this thing. So I think that when that is sealed and delivered, I think that Democrats will feel very good about that. That was the real prize. In Montana, this is a state where national Democrats, the Schumers and the Pelosi's and the Ocasio-Cortezes and all those folks that are sort of in the press all day long as Democrats, they don't really speak a language that means a lot to voters here. And that has always been the difficulty for Democrats in Montana. And I think that it has gotten worse in recent years. And I think Trump has capitalized on it. And so I can't say that I was that surprised by the results last night. I was a little bit surprised by the margin in the Bullock race. That actually did surprise me, especially given the amount of resources that were brought to bear. Those super resourced in races where you have hundreds of millions of dollars spent usually are pretty close. But again, this was a long time in coming. It's been a long time since the National Party has spoken a language that means anything to voters in this state. And I think we were eventually going to pay the price, and now we pretty much have.
Let's talk specifically of Montana. The Republicans ran the whole plate of, except I guess a few legislative seats, but here in the Billings area, they lost a few longtime state senators. I'm just interested. It looks like the Democratic strongholds, if you can call those, in Montana are down to Missoula and Bozeman, and maybe scattered a few other places. Lewis and Clark's kind of 50-50. There's not many Democratic counties left. Cascade County used to be big Democratic county when I was growing up and in college. And I think every Republican legislative candidate won in Cascade County yesterday. AshLee, what's your takeaway from that?
Absolutely. First and foremost, we're seeing record turnout this cycle here in Montana, 90,000 more votes as of today than what we saw in 2016. That enthusiasm clearly translated to Republicans. And as you noted, the state, which is we've all known as being a purple state, last night was a very clear red wave. There's no other way to describe it. Every single statewide race went to Republicans. And then, like you said, counties like Cascade, which were typically Democratic counties, Democratic leaning counties, went full Republican. Every legislative race there and every statewide race in Cascade County went to Republicans. And you're seeing gains being made in Lewis and Clark counties and elsewhere. The trend toward Democrats consolidating in Missoula and Bozeman is certainly on display. And as always, the powerful Yellowstone County is important, and Democrats did not put the numbers up they needed. I would just note, in terms of the Senate race being so far spread, as of right now, it's 10% between Bullock and Daines.
Right.
I think Bullock is a good recruit. He was the best recruit the Democrats could have had in a state like this, a popular incumbent governor. And even still, Daines is running up 10 points ahead of him. And I think that really speaks to the character and quality of Senator Daines as a candidate and the race that he ran. It was a hard fought race between both of them. And ultimately, Daines came out on top, but I think that speaks to the ability that he has as a leader and as a candidate. It'll be interesting to see what the state holds moving forward. But right now, it appears we were trending more red than we've ever been.
Absolutely. Erica, your takeaway. Looks like Senator Jon Tester's the party bearer and maybe the only one at this point.
Yeah, and that's actually, he's a good flag bearer to have. I mean, he is, guys like him and Schweitzer before him, they give an image to the party that is helpful to us. It's increasingly hard to find people like that because rural types like that, he got into this when he was in his 30s and he came from a Democratic family out in Big Sandy, and there are a lot fewer of those today. So I'm not sure how many of those types of people we will see run for Senate, run for governor, get into politics on the Democratic side. There were a few that lost in primaries this time around that came from the rural parts of the state that had an agrarian background. But we'll see. And it's going to be a while. Nothing is going to change overnight here. I mean, we are now sort of in the wilderness for a bit. And I think the issue is sort of what is Greg Gianforte going to do now that he has a lot of friends in the legislature? And is he going to, sometimes a governor discovers that sometimes it can be a bad thing to have too many friends in the legislature. So we will see.
As we were talking prior to recording this, you could say the Republicans have a rather large mandate now, and we'll see how that works out. You said they own it, Eric. They own it. Let's see what they do with it.
They own it, and they're making no bones about the fact that people who were legislators who were once considered like extremists and so far to the right that they were being accused of hanging out with neo-Nazis are now being quoted as the spokespeople for the Republican legislature. And so it will be interesting to see how Governor Gianforte navigates this stuff. The Solutions Caucus, which was the moderate gang of Republicans that Democrats used to make deals with, they are now outnumbered in a way that they weren't before. It looks like it's going to be the case. We're going to lose enough seats so that might happen. And so, it's new ground. We haven't looked at a scenario like this in a long time. And when Mark Roscoe was governor way back when, that was a different era, and you didn't have the Tea Party and you didn't have the Freedom Caucuses and this division. So it'll be, if nothing else, it'll be fun to watch from the sidelines, which is what I'll be doing most likely.
And AshLee, your takeaway, sometimes it's tough to deal with a mandate like this because I guess the pressure's on now. Let's see what you can do with it.
Look, I think that there's a expectation of it's time to roll up your sleeves and get to work. I think everyone knows that. I've heard that in every single, text message that I've had with candidates who have won. No one's taking anything for granted at this point. They know that there's a lot of work to be done. We've had 16 years of a Democrat governor who has vetoed countless bills. I think we're going to see a lot less bills being vetoed, a lot more results, a lot more productive work occurring. And you're certainly right that there's the onus is on Republicans now. But I think it's an exciting opportunity, one that we haven't had in a long time. And I don't think anyone's going to take it for granted. And I don't think anyone's going to sit back and just let things roll by. I think they're going to be in a position of putting points on the board. Governor-elect Gianforte is a businessman. I think he has very clear expectations for producing results, and I suspect we'll see that happen. I also think you hit on an interesting point about all having one party rule. We saw that at the federal level with Obama having two chambers at one point, and the problems that existed then, and we also saw that with President Trump and having two chambers at one point as well of Republican. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I think Montana Republicans are extremely excited. They're ready to put points on the board, and they're also ready to work with their Democrat colleagues. I've heard that throughout every speech last night and every statement that was put out. They're ready to go the Montana way, which is working with their neighbors and getting things done, and I expect we'll see that.
Yeah, it's a good position to be in. And I think maybe the state is excited. Maybe we can get some things done. This political stalemate's getting a bit old. Eric, what happened to Montana's history of being ticket splitters? You always hear this from political analysts. Oh, Montanans like to hedge their bets. It didn't really look like it happened this time.
No, and by the way, it not only did it not happen this time, but if you look back, 2010 we got clobbered. 2014 we got clobbered. 2016 we got clobbered. 2012 the Republicans had a weak nominee going up against an incumbent president who was popular, fairly popular around the nation, and had a lot of fans here and enthusiasm. This has been a longer term trend than I think people realize, and ticket splitting, the kind that puts a Trump, or excuse me, a Tester or a Bullock or a Schweitzer, in office, it is probably somewhat reduced. And what happens is when you have a strong enough showing as a red state, it just means that people are more likely to vote party line, and that is what happened last night.
And I would just note on what Eric's pointing out, a Tester, and I've said this to both of you numerous times, John Tester is not a Governor Bullock. They're two very different candidates, two very different styles. Last cycle when Tester was running for re-election, he had statewide TV ads touting his work with President Trump. That is not something that we saw with Governor Bullock's approach to this race. And in fact, not only did he run against him rhetorically, he actually ran against him in the presidential race, and then beyond that called for his impeachment. So those are two very different tactics, and it'll be interesting to see if, as Eric mentioned at the top of this program, if Democrats learn lessons from this and realize, how far they can go and how far they can't go in a state like Montana, where we're still very conservative on a number of issues.
And remember, Bullock still has a card to play, because on some level in a Biden administration, you're going to need to if Biden is smart, he'll want to reach out and put people like Bullock in a cabinet. And so Steve is good at playing the long game. And so I think he ran for the Senate seat, understanding that it was going to be a very tall order, but probably knowing that there was at least, hopefully, maybe something, there's something there waiting for him if he loses. It's always a consolation prize. That would be a nice thing. And that would be good for Montana. We've had very little representation in cabinets. In fact, I think Ryan Zinke
was the first one.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So we'll see if that happens, or perhaps the Biden administration is going to look at it as, we need to just sort of think about our base and not reach out. So we don't know what that would look like. And we still don't know if it's going to be a Biden administration. I think it will be.
Let's talk a little bit about, as much as we hear in the world of we live in, it's Republicans versus Democrats, red versus blue states. It looks to me like it's really more urban versus rural, not just in Montana, but across the country. Look at those maps. And in fact, as they're counting the votes still, it's those urban centers that have the last hope for Joe Biden to win this election. Just your comment on that, this urban versus rural divide we have all across the country.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on a great point. There are a number of issues, whether it's social issues like abortion, issues like gun rights. Those issues are dramatically different in urban centers compared to rural areas. And I think you're seeing that play out across the country. I would say that I think Democrats had anticipated that they would have stronger support amongst certain demographics of what was traditionally their base. We had discussed this last night, but Hispanics, Miami-Dade, Latino individuals across the country, obviously they're not monolithic and they don't vote the same way. And I think that for too long, the Democratic Party has sort of counted on these groups as monolithic groups that they could rely on, whether they're in urban or rural areas. And that just hasn't been borne out in the results that we're seeing today. Really, success is won on the issues and talking directly to voters about these issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with AshLee, and the Democrats have become a party that focuses first and foremost on, your identity and your membership in a group and your skin color and your gender and all of these different things. And on the one hand, it's a continuation of civil rights concepts that I think is important for this country to have, but it's not necessarily the way to go about trying to win a national mandate. I think you need to be more universal in what you talk about as a political party and as a candidate representing a political party. And I think nationally that is a problem that is that is starting to bother the Democrats in a way that I think they are lucky that the presidential outcome appears to be going the way it is. But it is the reason that you have the urban-rural divide, and it seems to be getting worse.
Absolutely. You look at some of those counties just in eastern Montana, and Senator Daines was winning 75-25, 80-20, even higher than that. And I'm not sure you hit on many of the reasons, but what can Democrats do to regain at least a little bit of footing? It's such a slam dunk now that for the immediate future, given the results from the statewide returns, it looks like Democrats are facing an even more uphill battle than they were before this election.
Well, right. I mean, we'll see what the answer is. That they can't. It's not in their hands right now. We'll see what Gianforte is made of, and we'll see what kind of a governorship he puts together. And if he goes down the wrong, there are a number of paths for him to take, and if he takes the wrong one, he is going in not a popular person in this state. His job approval and his sort of popularity hover in the high 30s. So he has some work to do. And he can either do it right or do it wrong. And if he does it wrong, then this state will be back in play at some point for Democrats.
Governing is a tough job, isn't it?
It's a lot tougher.
Suddenly when it's like, uh-oh, now what do I do? But I'm pretty sure I know what he's got a plan. There's no question.
Politically, a state government is a giant creature that is appended to you as the governor. And it can cause a lot of problems politically if you're not careful.
I absolutely would concur that governing is hard. I've been in the majority party, trying to govern. It is a difficult thing, but I have no doubt if there's anyone well positioned, it's a successful business leader like Gianforte. He's, I don't think that there's any task in terms of budget and those sorts of things that he can't take on. And he clearly has defined his agenda. I think that helped him in this race, putting the comeback plan out there, putting it out early, being very specific in his policy ideas. Montanans have an idea of what he would do. And I think, if they have any questions, they can look at that document. But I certainly think that from day one, they'll be ready to go. In fact, I have talked to a number of people close to the candidate, and they've already been well in the works as any well-prepared candidate would be for governing. In terms of the what can Democrats do question, it's a good one because frankly, I think people are starting to realize that voting for someone in Montana like a Democrat candidate, as in Bullock, would only block the larger agenda both in the Senate and with the White House. I think people connected those dots. There's no way that Governor Bullock would have been elected and then caucused as an independent or caucused with Republicans. We all know that he would have been with Democrats. And I think Republicans were able to nationalize that race in a way that you consistently saw on TV, whether it was Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi. They were successful in being able to highlight the reality that if you vote for someone like Bullock, you will probably get the more liberal results that the national Democrats are pushing. So that's just a reality that Democrats will have to be able to address in the future. And I'm not certain that that has set in yet based on the current campaign.
Eric, I guess we'll get a chance to see. We've heard so long from the Republican Party that we need a businessman in charge. We need to run the state government like a business. That's about what we're going to see. At least that's what I anticipate. How about you?
And that's what Schweitzer did for 8 years. That was his campaign in 2004, and that was his general theme as a governor. So there's a blueprint there, and I suspect if Gianforte is smart, he probably will try to follow that blueprint to the extent that a Republican can. It's a little bit different because there are different issues. He has different interest groups to whom he is beholden, different friends that want different things. But generally speaking, that's not a bad way to message your way into the governorship and to be a governor. It's to say, I'm a business person, and the state needs somebody with an eye for business to manage finances.
Eric, as you well know, in Montana, once you get elected as governor, you've got less than 2 months to put together your administration, your cabinet, whatever you want to call them, your department heads. It's not much time to get ready, and the legislature starts right after the new year. It's no time for the training wheels. You better be ready to go.
Right, and they're talking about. I mean, what the Republicans are talking about is cutting the top tax rate in this state. That's for people who make literally hundreds of millions of dollars a year and live at the Yellowstone Club and have their address there. That's the main proposal. They're also talking about eliminating the requirement that people need to be wearing masks during the pandemic, and they're talking about paying for the tax cut by raiding the tourism promotion fund. And so those are pretty radical ideas, and I'm not sure that the general public is looking for things like that, but we'll see.
AshLee, what do you see? What do you see coming right in the first few months from this administration? Because, as I said, the ball gets rolling right off the bat.
Yeah, I obviously categorically would reject all of the items that Eric just listed off. This shouldn't be a surprise, but I think the focus obviously is jobs in the economy. We're coming off of this pandemic that has significantly hit certain sectors of our economy, the tourism economy, bars and restaurants, hospitality. These are areas that are still greatly suffering from the COVID pandemic and the response and regulations that have come down. And I think jobs in the economy will be the first items on the list. It's the first items mentioned in his plan. And keep in mind, the legislator is likely to be gaining seats for Republicans in both chambers. So we're going to see some organizational changes as well. We still have to have leadership elections in both of those chambers. That'll come in November when they meet. And so we'll see who the governor will be working with in leadership. But I'm certain those conversations have already been taking place, and planning, I'm sure, is well underway.
Maybe our final question is running a bit short on time, but wondering if both of you see, is this a shift in Montana politics long term? Are we going to be amongst this big, huge red block as North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, and Idaho? Montana was always, as you mentioned, AshLee, kind of a purple state. Do you see this to be at least a long-term shift in how Montana is perceived on the national political scene?
I think the answer to that is we don't know. I think that ultimately we're in unprecedented territory. I would like to think Montanans will retain their independent streak, their sort of indignant, freedom-loving, self-reliant streak, and I suspect that will continue, and that independence will be strong and alive. But you can't deny the numbers. Last night was a red wave, as we've never seen it before. And we are starting to mirror other surrounding states like Idaho, South Dakota, and Wyoming based on last night's results.
Eric, what do you see long term?
We will see how the Republicans acquit themselves in the leadership position. That's really that's going to be the question. That was the question when Schweitzer and Bullock both came into power, which is, what are they going to do? Are they going to be parochial and party oriented, or are they going to reach out and think about everybody? And if the Republicans do that, it will be red for a while.
At least in the governor's race, we just mentioned how Gianforte came out with the plan, and it seemed like Lieutenant Governor Cooney was saying, well, more of the same of what we've seen with Governor Bullock, which maybe that's a plan, but it didn't seem to ring with the voters. And I'm wondering if the Democratic Party in Montana really needs to rethink how they approach these races, because the sales tax argument is getting pretty old, and they dusted it off and used it again.
Cooney, look, if you're going to build a candidate in laboratory, it wouldn't look like Mike Cooney. He's a great guy. He's a great public servant, very effective as a legislator, as a senator and as a lieutenant governor. But he's not the archetype of what you want to put on a ticket, for a statewide race that has a lot of visibility like that. Gianforte wasn't either, because he's obviously, wasn't born and bred here. So he's got his negatives too. But I think you're right. I think that there was when you've been in there long enough, your language will start to sound more and more like your party.
Right.
And it's very hard to make the reality check and to get out there and get away from it all. I think that affects what you say and how you say it. And I think a fair criticism of the state's party is that it has gradually reverted back to sounding like a very good version of Democrats rather than sounding like something fundamentally independent. And that's the challenge that we face, and especially given the gravitational pull and the media presence day in and day out of national Democrats, those who are in San Francisco and Washington, D.C. and New York.
AshLee, if you were in charge of dusting off the Democratic game plan, what would your advice be?
Yeah, I think that we have seen Democrats have success in this state, obviously, up until this cycle. Democrats who have had the most success in this state, I suppose they probably shouldn't be taking advice from me, but if I were to give them advice, I would say go back to your roots, go back to where you were, 15 years ago, talking about policies that Montanans care about, rejecting the pull at the national level to go further and further and further to the left, further toward, things that just don't resonate here. And we saw that in Bullock's primary race for the presidential election. He moved to the left on guns. He moved to the left on immigration. These are things that ultimately just don't play here. People don't like those extreme policies. And so I think if Democrats want to have a fighting chance in the future in Montana here, I think they ought to really go back to the fundamentals and really evaluate how far they've gone, how extreme they've gone from where Montanans are in the center. I think that would be a wise start.
We have just 30 seconds left. Should we ever believe any political poll we ever see again? I think people will just go, never mind. What do you think?
Well, I made this point last night. There's a difference between public polls, which are
right,
cheap and quick, versus the ones where you have a really good pollster who makes a lot of money and charges you a lot of money, but actually do very well in coming up with the right analytics, the right sampling, and they produce a number that's more realistic. And my guess is that the internal numbers that Democrats had this last few months were far more gloomy than what we're seeing in public.
I see. AshLee, you've got the final word here.
Yeah, I would agree with Eric on those points. I would just note there's one particular public polling that I think really ought to be evaluated, and that's the university system polling. That's taxpayer funded polling, and ultimately they've been pretty far off base for several recent polls, their sampling size, their methodologies. And I think ultimately, though, like I said last night, there's probably going to be a hard conversation to be had, an honest conversation to be had about our university system polling.
And there should be. She's right.
Hey, both of you. AshLee, Eric, thank you so much for all your contributions for our election coverage over the last few months. It's a pleasure talking to you. Always nice to see you. You guys, good luck in the future, and I hope to talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Jay.
Thank
You bet.
so
And
much.
for our viewers here on Face the State, thanks for viewing. Thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you again soon.